Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Nick, and I help direct events here at the Strand. Before we launch into tonight's event with Reza Farazmand, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 93 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers, we wouldn't be here today. Tonight, we are excited to have with us comic illustrator Reza Farazmand. Reza lives and draws in Los Angeles. Best known for his comic series, Poorly Drawn Lines, his work has been featured in and around such places as televisions, websites, magazines, and now this book. When he's not writing or drawing, Reza enjoys drinking coffee and looking at things on screen, something I can very well relate to. Today marks the publication of his first graphic novel, City Monster. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Reza to the stage.
Hey everyone, I'm Reza. First off, I just want to say thank you all for coming to my book talk, and thanks to the Strand for hosting. I obviously do wish we could be doing this in person, but there are more pressing issues going on in the world right now than in-person book talks. And I actually think this is a really cool format anyway, because with a live book talk, I'm usually just talking to people in one city or town. But now with this virtual book talk, I'm talking to people from like multiple cities and towns. So that's pretty neat. One thing to note is that it might be a little hard for me to time these slides that I'm showing you without direct audience feedback. So I'm going to do my best to leave each slide up for a while so you all have some time to look at it. As I said, my name is Reza, and you probably know me from my comic series, Poorly Drawn Lines, which typically looks something like this. I can give you a minute to read that. Just imagine everyone around you laughing together as an audience. It also sometimes looks like this. This is based on a couple of cats that showed up in my yard recently. And because I love drawing comics like these two, a couple years ago, I decided I wanted to make the ultimate comic, a graphic novel. I've actually thought about doing a graphic novel for a long time, but a couple years ago, I decided I was really going to commit to actually making it happen. And that book eventually became City Monster. Thank you to my publisher, Plume, for these cool, glamorous shots of City Monster. But before I could finish City Monster or even really get started, the first thing I had to do was figure out how to make a graphic novel. I'm very used to drawing comic strips, which begin and end in just a few panels, but a graphic novel was mostly new territory for me. And in doing research, I discovered that one of the main characteristics of a graphic novel is that it's actually much longer than a comic strip. One of my typical comic strips is usually looks like this, and it goes kind of like something, something, something else. Pretty standard. But with a graphic novel, it goes more like something, 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 and then like 100 more pages of stuff. So there's a little bit more space to fill. And conventional wisdom says that you fill that space with two main features: characters and a story. Now, I have some experience with characters from my time doing Poorly Drawn Lines. Here's one of those characters, this nameless gray mouse that I use pretty often. But the thing about this nameless gray mouse that I use pretty often is that I use him for all kinds of roles and situations. At times, he's the disgruntled charlatan. At others, he is an anxious wreck. And at other times still, he is the confident fool. So the great thing about this mouse is that he can basically be a comedic vessel for whatever joke I feel like writing on any given day. But with this graphic novel, I wanted to create characters with more defined personalities that I could follow through an entire story rather than just one or two situations like what I'm used to writing in my comics. From the start, I knew I wanted the story to be about a Bigfoot-type monster who moves from the forest to the city. That was the first shred of an idea I've had for the whole thing. I've personally been new to several cities, and I wanted to capture some of those experiences in this story while also making it completely absurd and surreal. And while I started conceptualizing the story with one character, the book eventually ended up being about three: the monster, the ghost who haunts his apartment, and their vampire neighbor. The monster would be the wide-eyed newcomer, the vampire would be the experienced city dweller, and the ghost would be a bit of a mystery, inhabiting his own odd reality between worlds. And the way I initially went about writing the story was similar to how I write comic strips. I imagined these characters in different situations and wrote funny dialogue to go with it. And that gave me a sense of who they'd be and how they'd react to things. And also gave me a good idea of the kind of humor I was going to use, but it didn't immediately give me a way to tie all of this into a story. But then at some point, I wrote this scene with the monster and the ghost talking, where the ghost says he can't remember anything about when he was alive because he's been in limbo for so long. But he's also smoking weed heavily throughout the entire conversation. So you get a sense that he might just be really stoned and forgetful. And then I followed that idea into the monster and the vampire trying to figure out who the ghost was, which became a big part of the story I'd eventually write. That story ends up taking the characters all over the city, which is in kind of a perpetual state of Halloween, filled with monsters, spirits, and magic. They walk places. They meet a mummy. Let me go back to that walk places one real quick. Can't leave that up for long enough. They meet a mummy. They hang out with a witch. They get snacks. They run places. And then something, and then something, and then something else. And then like 100 more pages of stuff. So in a lot of ways, just like a comic strip, but in a lot of other more important ways, completely different. Outside of characters and story, one of the things I wanted to do with this book was to make more use of backgrounds and scenery. In my comic strips, the characters are often standing in a blank, undefined space, which works great for a short comic where setting might not be as important. For instance, here, for some background, Ernesto and Kevin are hanging out in their apartment, but that's not really important to the larger joke that goes on in the rest of this comic strip, which I didn't include. So while I'm fine with using simple spaces like this for my comic strips, with City Monster, I wanted to give a sense that the story actually takes place in a real defined space with a real look and feel. And so that meant drawing things like buildings, streets, rooms, and skylines to kind of fill out the world a little bit more. And clearly, I still kept it all pretty simple and minimal. But I found that just a few background elements in every scene helped give some depth to the setting. This is a coffee shop scene early on. This forest scene, which is the first page of the book and the next few pages, was definitely one of the most time-consuming backgrounds to draw, and also one of the first pages that I drew when I was conceptualizing the book. With all the trees and greenery, it's definitely one of the densest visually things that I've probably ever drawn. And after this, I pretty much gave up on trees and mainly just drew buildings for the rest of the book. I also wanted to keep a consistent color palette throughout City Monster with lots of deep blues and purples to give the city this kind of feeling of permanent twilight. And at the same time, I used a lot of pastel colors on the buildings to contrast with the dark skies and surroundings and give the streets a sort of weirdly colorful vibe compared to the world that they exist in. This is the exterior of the coffee shop, which I made pink. And here are some of the buildings and scenery that I used as reference. These are mostly from internet searches, but I also snapped a lot of pictures of city scenery on my phone while I was working on the book that I would refer back to later. Here's a couple more. For the cover, I pulled inspiration from old monster movie posters, specifically the awesome kind of scary looking typefaces that you'd see on those. Here's a few more. I also pulled a lot from the Universal monster movie canon when I was choosing what kind of supernatural creatures I'd use. So I stuck to a lot of classics like mummies and vampires. And all of these posters are by the artist Carolee Gross, who was art director at Universal Pictures for most of the 1930s, and obviously did some really cool work. Here's a few more of those. Another general inspiration for the book was this band, The Cramps, who I was listening to a lot while working on City Monster. They had this cool, campy punk horror aesthetic, and I was trying to evoke some of that attitude and style throughout the book, particularly whenever I drew Kim the Vampire. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I do have some more stuff to show you all. And so one thing that a lot of people don't know is that I actually draw all of my art up until recently has been done with pencil and ink on Bristol board. So this is one of the pages from the book. I don't know how well focused it is. Hopefully you can see it pretty clearly, but you might be able to see the blue pencil that I use first, which I then go over with black line mark. And this is vellum Bristol board, which is like the rougher variety of Bristol board. So it gives some nice grit to the pencil and pen when you're working on it. And then this is another page. This is inside the coffee shop with a minotaur. And there's another one when the monster is hanging out on his couch after he's failed to figure out what to do with his life. And a cool shot of Kim's living room, which I tried to make look distinctly cooler than the monster's living room. This is the cover minus the title, which I did on a separate piece of Bristol board and cut out and inserted it later. I see that some people might be having some issues with it freezing, so I'll hold this for a little bit longer so hopefully you can see it. And these pieces of paper I think started out at, they're like 9 by 12 or something, and then I cut them down, but I obviously work on a smaller area within them. And yeah, there is, again, this is the title in that cool kind of classic horror monster movie poster font. Another thing about working in traditional media is that if I want to make any corrections to text or anything, I have to kind of like write it out separately on another piece of paper and insert it later. So this is a text sheet that I was using for additional speech bubbles and like descriptor text that I would insert in later. And then all of this stuff all of this traditional line work and pencil work gets digitized. I was using Photoshop for most of the time that I was drawing this way. And then it gets colored in Photoshop. I just like drag and drop colors in from a pre-built palette, basically. And so since City Monster was a little over 100 pages, this is what the actual final like physical material looks like. These are all the pages together, minus the ones that I just showed you, obviously. And yeah, there's a lot of them. And in some cases, you can see that I actually add like additional text right on top of the page that I'm writing on. But also, you might notice if you've read the book already that pretty much all of the text on this page actually changed between when I wrote it and the final draft of the book. So yeah, it was like a little bit of an organic process where I was definitely making changes and perfecting things and tweaking lines and pages as I went. And I'm pretty happy with the final product, and I hope you all enjoy it too. So that's really all I've got in terms of structured presentation for you. And I thought I would turn it over to questions now, if anyone wants to know anything about my process or about the book.
That was really fascinating. Thank you for showing us that sort of peek behind the curtain with how this was made. I, for one, am sort of blown away that your work isn't done digitally from the ground up.
Yeah, that's I've recently started working digitally more. I picked up an iPad and have been working on that a lot. But that's really my first like exposure or use of digital art for any kind of like extended work. I've done everything on paper up until now.
Yeah. I feel like you and I are very similar in that regard. I recently came into an iPad and I've been trying to teach myself Procreate.
Oh yeah, I love Procreate. It's great. It's like I've kind of shied away from digital artwork just because I never quite liked how graphics tablets felt. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to make this like a product endorsement, but it was definitely the first time that I was like, oh, I could maybe actually see this being something I'd use. Yeah. Just because it actually kind of feels like.
I feel like it's pretty elegantly simplified as far in terms of like Photoshop versus Procreate. But enough of my blathering. Let's get on to some audience questions.
Sure.
Let's see. Here's one. You partially answered a portion of this question, but I'd like to read the full thing just anyway. This is from. Their name is not specified. It is a anonymous user, but what's your creative process? Do you think a lot of your humor comes from situations you see / experience, or are you just thinking them up? Do you work backwards from a punchline?
Yeah, I think there's pretty much all of those options I use them at different times. I'm sure that everything I write is in one way or another informed by some experience, even if I'm not like specifically trying to refer to that experience at the time. Sometimes the idea of working from a punchline is kind of interesting because sometimes I will just write a line that I think is really funny and that I will build a comic around that line or around a character that I think is really funny looking, or sometimes just like a facial expression that I think is really entertaining. So a comic can start from a lot of different places, but for the most part, it starts for me just sitting down at my desk and thinking and kind of like free associating and trying to filter my experiences and thoughts and stuff into something funny.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Here's another one. Who / what are your comedic influences?
My comedic influences, well, first of all, I grew up reading a lot of comic strips, mostly gag comics, like what you'd see in the Sunday paper. Less so comic books and more strip comics, because I guess I just loved having a joke start and end in just a few panels. And then outside of those, I would say probably my biggest comedic influences are just like the webcomic scene, and especially the early webcomic scene, I guess you would call it the mid webcomic scene of like 2006 to 2010 or something. There was a lot of interesting stuff happening, a lot of webcomics taking off. And I was just starting to discover webcomics, like, I don't know, XKCD, White Ninja, Dinosaur Comics, a lot of old classics. I think I just saw somebody mention some of those in a comment, actually. Hark a Vagrant. There were so many good comics to get into back then, and they were doing interesting, edgier, newer, more modern humor than what I was seeing in newspapers or whatever. And yeah, so I think that like portion of webcomic history is probably still my biggest comedic influence. And then outside of that, I really like pretty much like Adult Swim cartoons, Wes Anderson movies, Kurt Vonnegut books. I think that, yeah, that's where I draw a lot of my like deadpan influence from.
Yeah, there's a sort of dry quality that I think is overlapping there in a good way. So it's clear. Yeah, Kate Beaton is great.
Yeah,
I love her stuff. Here's an interesting one. Did you go to grad school? And if not, where did you or your characters get this jaded attitude about life? Or is there one of your characters that you identify with the most? Kevin, Ernesto?
I've always thought of, okay, so I guess I'll back up a little bit. I did not go to grad school. I did my undergrad at UC San Diego, and I was a political science major. And I never thought comics or art would be in my future. I thought maybe I would get into comedy writing in some way. And in a lot of ways, I was using comics as a way to practice my timing and joke writing. But then it kind of like snowballed into a career from there. And then in terms of the jaded attitude, I love that. I love how the assumption is that you can only get that from grad school. But I guess it's just like, I don't know, my overall worldview. Like I try not to be too negative or come off as too jaded. And I think I try to inject positivity and optimism and kindness into my comics as well. But yeah, I'd say that Ernesto comes off as pretty jaded, and I kind of write his character that way on purpose. One of the things I mentioned in my talk was that my characters are often changing, like the mouse. But with Ernesto and Kevin, I've drawn them so much that I feel like they've really taken on real personalities at this point. And so, yeah, Ernesto's a little bit more jaded. Kevin is supposed to be a little bit more positive and whimsical and upbeat. And I would say that my personality is probably kind of split between those two things. So I probably just like channeling my own personality through them.
This is similar to what you just addressed, but sort of an offshoot. So I figure I'd go ahead and ask this. Someone from the audience asked, do you have a favorite character? So your personality is sort of an amalgamation of these characters, but do you have one particular favorite?
I think my favorite is Kevin, because I can just have him say the most ridiculous, unexpected things. And yeah, I love writing jokes around Kevin. And he's also like so innocent and nice looking. And so when he says some of the outlandish stuff he says, I think, yeah, it gets me. I laugh at my Kevin jokes while I'm writing them probably more than any others.
How about from the pantheon of poorly drawn lines?
Oh, did you mean within the book, within City Monster?
I think these questions were specifically from City Monster, but another guest was wondering if there was a poorly drawn lines character that you identify most with.
Okay, so I guess I just said Kevin for poorly drawn lines that I like / identify with most. But from the book, I think it would be hard. But all the three main characters, the forest monster, the ghost, and the vampire, yeah, I like them all. And I feel like I grew pretty attached to them throughout the course of writing and drawing the book. Because it feels like when a graphic novel takes a long time, so it felt like I had months and months and months to live with the characters and kind of get to know them. So it was almost like saying goodbye when I was done writing the book or something.
Oh, that must feel tough, but like relieving in a way too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Also really relieving, because it's also, yeah, it's definitely a lot of work, and it felt really amazing to finally finish it at the end.
Awesome, man. That's good.
Yeah.
Here is a big mood question. What is your process for approaching blank pages?
Blank pages, like in the context of writing a book.
Yeah, I think the way I'm interpreting it is just like the slab. How do you start? Like the enormity of it.
I start with is doing my panel work, and that almost is kind of like meditative in some way, because I'm not like having to think creatively. I'm just putting my ruler to the paper and drawing lines, and that it has this effect on me where it feels like I'm starting to build a comic. It's sort of like putting up the frame of the house or something. So yeah, starting with the paneling, I feel like is a good way to start like touching the paper and working with my tools. And sometimes I'll start paneling before I have a joke out, because it just feels like, calming or something to do it.
Do you make smaller studies before you go on to like the full scale thing, or does it just go straight from here to there?
I do. I will, a lot of times I'll do like little thumbnails on a page. I'll just have like a page of thumbnails I might actually have an example.
Oh yeah, I'd love to see those.
Because I brought out all the City Monster material. Okay, this is not a page, but this is an example of the cover when I was conceptualizing the cover. So initially just had the monster in the middle. And then my editor suggested including a couple of the other characters. So now I have all three of the main characters. You can kind of see where I was working with it here and trying to figure out how to get Kim the vampire in there.
Yeah.
That's like a small, like, I don't know, 1.5 inches or whatever. And then it eventually became the cover, which is obviously much bigger. Yeah, so you can see like the size difference there.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much one of the through line qualities of any successful artist I've heard of or talked with. It's just like they do thumbnails every time.
Yeah.
You know? It's just one of the secrets to success.
Yeah, it's good there. And then I don't do that for every comic. Sometimes I'll already or for every page I didn't do it, because sometimes I just like had a really clear idea of what I was going to go for. So just doing the actual panel work on the page would be enough to sort of lay it all out. And then I might like sketch really lightly where the characters were going to be within the shot. So sometimes I'll do that. And then sometimes if it's like a more difficult scene, I'll like lay out the whole thing in thumbnail mode like that.
Yeah. Here's a good one. What was the moment that made you realize just how big poorly drawn lines had gotten?
It's, I guess, getting my first book deal was a pretty big thing. And then watching the numbers climb on Instagram over the past couple of years has been like a pretty clear indicator of where it was going audience-wise. And then I guess when my first book, Poorly Drawn Lines, hit the New York Times bestseller list, that was pretty sweet too. And yeah, I guess other than that, though, it's really just there's been no like specific moment. It's been more just kind of like a slow and steady climb over like almost a decade now of doing Poorly Drawn Lines, maybe even longer than that at this point. I don't know. Past year doesn't really count because it went by in a weird sense.
Yep. A strange year indeed. Seeing it on the bestsellers list must have been such a awesome feeling.
Yeah, that was really cool.
Man. Here's one. You touched on this during your presentation, but I think someone wanted you to delve deeper. Did you encounter any unexpected challenges in transitioning from short form comics to long form storytelling?
Yeah, I think, well, probably the biggest challenge for me as far as like making the transition is that I still have a tendency to write in short scenes. So I was still, while I had to be thinking of like an overarching story, I was like, it was almost like my brain focuses in on the individual scenes and trying to make those scenes as funny as possible. So yeah, I guess part of me, I had to like force myself to think outside of a scene and think about how it was tying in and how that scene would tie into another scene like 20 pages later. So yeah, I guess it was just pushing myself to take a bigger look and kind of step back and thinking about how all these little scenes could link together into one big story.
Yeah. Well, when I encounter like any form of media that's just like long form story with, you know, motifs and scenes that reference each other on a macro and micro scale, it just kind of blows my mind to how someone could craft that.
Yeah. There's like, I know, I look at someone like Chris Ware, who just has like these enormous like generation spanning stories. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
That dude is nuts in a good way. Like he also was a person who I thought worked digitally.
Yeah,
but it's not. The moment I saw his pencils and his inks, I was like,
and like his protractors or whatever he uses, like some to get all those perfect shapes and stuff. It's really inspiring stuff.
Fastidious. It's crazy. It's awesome. So much respect for his like craft.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I just found a great one. We have a lot of questions, so I have to scroll through them.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, here's a quick one. Any plans for bringing back Trash Bird?
Yeah. Well, so I've continued doing Trash Bird as like I kind of folded the Trash Bird world into the Poorly Drawn Lines world. So every now and then you'll see me do a Trash Bird comic within Poorly Drawn Lines, but probably no plans to bring Trash Bird back as like a dedicated strip. I mean, I'll never say never. Maybe I'll be inspired at some point because I still do really like the character and find that whole world kind of charming and funny. But yeah, for now, I think he'll just continue to make occasional cameos in Poorly Drawn Lines.
Cool. Here is a rare question that is actually signed from someone. It's Anne from Chicago, or On. I apologize if I mispronounce anyone's name. Do you ever laugh out loud at your own work? And what's your favorite strip?
Yeah, I do. I think so there was a time when I thought that me laughing out loud at my own work was like a good sign that it was going to be well received by my audience and get a bunch of likes or whatever. But then I definitely find myself more now like laughing out loud at the ones that the audience kind of seems to go over more people's heads. So it's almost like I'm like too amused by myself or something, and then I forget that it might not actually be such an obvious joke. But yeah, there are definitely some instances where I'll laugh out loud. Like I said, while I'm writing Kevin, sometimes I'll come up with some funny line for him to say, and I'll laugh about that. And then as far as favorite strips, I really like the whole arc where Ernesto like leaves the city and goes to live in nature. So yeah, that's probably one of my favorite ones. Yeah. And then there are a couple of 2-panel comics that I like as well. There's one with a crab saying, "Just be a crab, don't fuck this up," which I think kind of speaks to a lot of my own anxieties and stuff. Yeah. So I guess those two.
Nice. Here's an interesting one. With the spooky element throughout the book, as well as the inspiration behind the cover, is it safe to assume that you like horror movies / books? If so, do you have any favorites or recommendations? So
actually, I mostly just like Halloween more than anything. And I don't necessarily like a lot of the like, I don't know, the media around it. I just like the feel and the vibe and the aesthetic. That's why I showed those posters. And I love like the campy kind of goofiness of a lot of those old horror movies. I don't really have any specific favorites. I really just pulled from that general canon of like Universal monster movie pictures for this without like directly using any of the stories.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that you can definitely say is they certainly have a palpable aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like sort of classic at this point.
It's classic. So I guess I'm just like a big lover of Halloween. It's probably my favorite time of the year, like fall and pumpkins and fog and spookiness. I want it to last all year round.
Dude, kindred.
That's my favorite as well. Yeah.
Kindred spirits. Autumn is the best season.
Yeah.
Here is a question from the audience. You turned me on to Life in Hell, so thank you for that. Are there any other comics you'd recommend that are perhaps newer?
Newer. Well, newer than Life in Hell is easy because Life in Hell is from like the 80s. So even though it's continued on for a long time. Some more recent ones, I'll maybe just name drop some people that I follow. False Knees comics, if you've come across those, they're beautifully illustrated animal comics. Imagine all of the like small animal humor of webcomics, but like drawn in actual like by like a really talented fine artist. So they're like a lot of fun to look at. Let's see, I also like, I'm a longtime fan of Sarah Anderson's comics. She has a new book out that's also kind of spooky themed. I like, what are some other ones I've been into recently? Oh, War and Peace. Peas is a good one. War and Peas, spelled like the vegetable. Also very funny and also relatively new. I think they've just kind of come up like in the past few years or so, but they already have a book out and stuff. And they just do like really funny, unexpected humor all the time. I like Extra Fabulous Comics. That's another great webcomic, ongoing. Yeah, I guess there's a ton to name. So I also really like the artist Tom Gauld, who's a British cartoonist who does really cool stuff. And he has a couple graphic novels out that I love.
How do you spell that last name, Gauld?
Gauld.
Thank you.
Yeah, I did some a small list of book recommendations for the week that's going to be published soon, and where I recommended one of his graphic novels. Yeah, so all of those that I named are like active, ongoing comics that you can check out.
Dope. All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Here's an interesting one. How long did it take you to create / write and draw City Monster, and do you plan to do it again?
So I first thought of it maybe like 2.5 years ago. I had the idea for it. And it pretty much started off with that initial scene of like the monster wanting to move to from the forest to the city. And then actually drawing everything and writing everything probably took me like a solid year, I guess. And I don't know, I guess if I was to condense all of the actual physical drawing time down, like it might have been, I don't know, 6 to 8 months or something. And yeah, I would absolutely do it again. It was definitely the biggest like creative challenge I've had, and obviously the longest piece of content that I've ever created. But there's something about, and I kind of touched on this in my talk earlier, there's something about creating a long form narrative with characters that you get to know and kind of expand on the personalities that I found very rewarding and fun in comparison to comic strips, which I still love drawing and will continue to draw. So yeah, I would absolutely love to do a longer form thing like this again at some point. Even though it is like a massive undertaking, it definitely requires a lot of planning and work. Yeah. But I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how to do it now, at least, like having done it once, and what ways I could improve next time.
Graphic novels are like tattoos. The first one is the hardest.
Yeah. I don't have any tattoos.
I don't know if that's true. I just made that up. So you mentioned earlier that you drew a lot of inspiration, or at the very least, you consumed a lot of comic strips when you were young. What was your favorite comic strip to read growing up? Or do you have like several?
Yeah, I guess I had a few. I mean, Peanuts is a classic. That's like one of the most classic comic strips of all time, obviously, for good reason. But there's definitely something about that simple, blocky, colorful artwork that kind of stuck with me. But then I remember specifically really liking the comic strip Pearls Before Swine when I was younger, and I still like it now, but just because it felt like it was like one of the newer comic strips in the newspaper around those times, and it felt a little bit like edgier or something. And so, yeah, I remember really liking that. And I feel like that comic had some influence on me when I was like starting to try to draw comics in high school.
Yeah.
And then someone mentioned Life in Hell as well, which was like a big long-time influence for me. And that's more of like an alt weekly comic strip rather than a newspaper strip.
Right. Cool. Yeah, dude, I had completely forgotten about Pearls before Swine, before you just brought it up. And now it's just like I'm remembering reading it in the Sundays. That's crazy.
Yeah, it was like there was something kind of like edgy and angry about it or something that was not in like Marmaduke or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. Let's see. Do you pay special attention to the expressions on your characters? Like some jokes just come together with expressions. The example they gave was, let's see, for e.g. the one that says, obviously, sure, bro, like we have time to read prophecies all day. If that sounds familiar.
Yeah, no, that's a recent one. And definitely facial expressions are important. I kind of do this trick a lot where I will just have no facial expression, and that's kind of part of the joke. Just like that, a blank expression can sometimes be funnier than trying to put a lot of emotion into a character's face. But there are times when a joke just calls for like raw emotion to be communicated, whether it's anger or sadness or happiness. So yeah, sometimes it's important. And sometimes I think it's also important to know when to pull back and actually put less emotion into a frame.
Wise words.
Yeah.
Have you had any interesting experiences where you tell people you're a comic designer and or where they recognize you and your work?
Yeah, definitely. I started, I don't remember like the first time it happened, but I definitely get people who are familiar with like internet humor knowing my work or who really like comics. Hopefully now people who like graphic novels will check my stuff out. But yeah, I've never gotten like recognized like out at random, but I always get like people seem to think it's cool that I'm a cartoonist, and I guess it's kind of an unusual thing to say you are. So yeah, I usually get people asking questions, and then after a couple of questions, if they're familiar with comics, there's like maybe a 50% chance that they've heard of Poorly Drawn Lines. So yeah.
Nice.
I do get to randomly come across some fans in the wild sometimes, which is always fun.
That's cool. Have you been recognized just like unprovoked?
No.
All right.
No, nothing like. But I also don't really like put myself in front of my work a lot.
Yeah.
Or I don't often not like with a YouTube channel or anything.
Right. Arguably, that's the best level of fame, to be known for your work and to have like a name, but to not be one of those people that's like recognizable in the street. So you can still be anonymous if you want to, but at the same time, you got it made.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah. What led you to your current drawing style? Do you ever want to explore new styles?
Yeah, I have had the chance to answer this question in the past, and what led me to my style, it was a combination of really liking clear, minimal things visually, and trying to come up with as clear and simple a style as I could to communicate a joke. Because I always thought of myself as a writer first before I ever even started drawing. And I don't have any formal art training or anything, so my artwork is very much adapted from me teaching myself how to draw and needing it to be simple and not messy. And so just trying to come up with like simple geometric shapes and straightforward visual representations of things. So yeah, it's a combination of like needing a simple style and also wanting a simple style and purposely moving in that direction. And as far as other styles, I actually have been teaching myself, let's see what I got here. I have some drawing books here. I've been teaching myself like some classical like figure drawing and stuff. So I don't know if I'll ever actually like utilize any of this professionally, but I am trying to learn how to do other styles of drawing as well.
Nice.
I think it's important to always learn and whatnot. Yeah.
Cool, man. That's good that you're, broadening the horizons, always striving to learn new things.
Mm-hmm.
As they always say, observation drawing is the name of the game.
Yeah, I've been doing gesture drawing, which is cool, which is like trying to use one stroke to represent something like movement or whatever in a figure. So yeah, I've like really never normal art classes, so it's kind of cool to learn some of these techniques.
Yep.
But I will probably into poorly drawn lines or anything like City Monster, because I also really love working in my distinct style that I've been working on.
Yeah, I feel like that is the sort of aesthetic that just is like, it's made a name for itself, and it lends itself very well to the material. So it's like I feel like any offshoots would be like new projects entirely.
Yeah, they have to be.
So yeah, that's a good point. Do you have a secret dream career if you weren't already a cartoonist?
Secret dream career. I think I've always thought I'd like to either be an architect or a musician. One of those two. I actually do have my guitars back there and my keyboard and stuff. So I'm like an amateur musician. I'm not an amateur architect, thankfully. I haven't tried to throw any buildings up without training.
It's very difficult to be an amateur architect.
Yeah, I'm not going to try that.
Let's see.
I was also when I was in college, I was thinking I would be a journalist or a lawyer, but probably a journalist.
Cool. Do you ever look at another comic strip joke and wish you'd written it first? And do you have a recent example?
No, I feel like I don't necessarily like feel envious of other jokes, but I definitely like recognize like a good joke when I see one. And someone I mentioned earlier, Extra Fabulous Comics, I feel like he just has some of the most creative, interesting jokes I've seen. And I wouldn't say I've been jealous, but I've definitely been like, oh, that's a good one. Like if I had come up with that, it would have been good. I actually have one of his comics on the wall back there too.
Nice.
You can see it.
There's a good one. How do you decide what animal/monster each particular character will be?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it just kind of depends on the situation. With this book, the monster, well, I knew I wanted this to be a monster who was new to a city, so I had him be like a Bigfoot/Sasquatch type monster who would obviously probably not have experience with a city. And then for Kim the vampire, I just wanted her to be kind of like cool and knowledgeable and stuff, so I made her like a sort of ageless vampire. And then I have a mummy character who shows up at some point, and I wanted him to have like a long, crazy life with like lots of regrets. So I made him like thousands of years old. And so I guess that's one reason to use a mummy, is because they're super old. But all of this, I think I can like explain it now and the reasoning behind it, but it all kind of arose very naturally and organically. And I wasn't like specifically like poring over a list of different monsters that I could make all of these different characters. It just sort of fell into place naturally.
Nice.
And then with a ghost, it's got to be a ghost, because that's,
Yeah. Very, very uniquely suited character role. All right. So we've got time for just a few more questions, and luckily enough, that's how many we have left.
Cool.
Let's see. Do you have any plans to animate?
Yeah, I've actually been I have a project going on the side right now where I'm basically trying to turn poorly drawn lines into an animated series. And I can't probably go into too many details about it, but it seems to be going pretty well. And I've been working on it for a while now. So hopefully people will get to see poorly drawn lines animated at some point in the not too far future.
Wow.
Yeah, but then outside of that, I would definitely look at other animation projects in the future too, because it just feels like a natural step from comics into animation, I think. And it's just like another cool medium that I can utilize my art style in.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Has 2020 impacted your inspiration? That's a heavy question.
Yeah, no, it's definitely hard to sometimes to sit down and write a joke and be funny when I've just read some really depressing headline or something. So yeah, it has, I don't know that it's impacted my productivity, but it's definitely impacted the way that I feel on a day-to-day basis. There's just like a lot more to be distracted by. But then when I was working on City Monster, I guess when did this all start? February, early March. It coincided pretty much perfectly with me needing to like really get down to the line and be like finishing the last pages of my book. So I probably wasn't going to be going out or anything too much at that point anyway. So it was like even more reason to stay in and just get my work done. So it was like and then fortunately by that point I had most of the story already plotted out and knew what I was going to do. So I didn't have too much reason to be like derailed creatively. It was like just getting the work done at that point.
Yeah, you had the goal in sight, so you could just like grind.
Yeah, I could, exactly. Grind is a good way to put it. Yeah, but I think that maybe if I had still been like writing the plot in the midst of this, then it might have been a little bit harder to feel creative and to like really get it done. Yeah.
Got it. There's a little element of luck there. That's good.
Yeah, definitely.
Sierra asks, when will we get another PDL playlist? Poorly drawn lines.
I actually was planning to, so I guess for people who don't know, I used to put out playlists on Spotify of the music I was listening to while I was drawing. And I haven't done one in a few years now, but I built a massive playlist while I was working on City Monster with like a bunch of that band, The Cramps, and a few other bands that have like spooky, like ghost or monster themed songs, like the OCs. And I was thinking about releasing that into a playlist at some point. So I might still put that out. Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. So Sierra, keep your eyes peeled. Yeah, this was kind of a nuts and bolts question here. What is your process for digitizing your drawings? How do you go from drawing to Photoshop file?
Hang on real quick. I have my trusty scanner, which has, I don't know if you can see, if you guys can see the sticker on there. It's this cat character that I drew a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, this is my Epson scanner, and I've actually had a lot less use for this recently because I've been drawing so much on the iPad. But yeah, this I would like, I literally bought a separate bag to carry that around with me when I was traveling. I would just take my scanner everywhere, and it's pretty small and compact, so I could just bust it out and scan something. So yeah, scanning, and then I have this, actually if you go on YouTube, I did a whole Photoshop tutorial with Adobe where I show my entire process of how I remove the blue pencil work and color balance to get those pure black lines.
I think I ran into that while prepping for the event.
I think I logged.
Like, oh, hey, look, there he is.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like literally a 3-part series of me digitizing and coloring a comic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally going to watch that. All right. So
that's like the best chronicle of my.
There you go. Folks, whoever asked that question, go and check out Reza's Photoshop tutorial on YouTube. And let's see. So why don't we have this be the question to end the night on? It's a good one to end on. Besides the very secret, not going to ask any more details about animation thing, What's next for you?
Mhm.
What sort of stuff are you working on?
Well, pretty much I'm trying to get back into the swing of doing my regular comic strips. And yeah, continuing to work on that animation thing, which is actually taking up quite a bit of time now. So that's still like something that I'm working on pretty heavily. I'd love to do another poorly drawn lines collection slash compendium once I feel like I have a good amount of stuff built up. And then I also always have to do a big chunk of new comics for those. So I'll need to set aside some time to do that. And then, yeah, I guess just continuing to put out the poorly drawn lines comics. And yeah, I'm going to try to do some longer form comics with poorly drawn lines as well, and some longer story arcs.
I have to read this chat from Eric. Even poorlier drawn lines. I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, that's the name of my third book. But it'll be even more. Yeah. I was thinking poorliest.
Poorliest, yes. But then what'll the one after that be?
It's hard. It's once you start ranting that, I don't know. I'm just gonna have to come up with a completely new name after that I can do little plays on.
Yeah. The wheels and woes of a online comic sensation. All right, folks at home, thank you for coming and thank you for tuning in. Reza, thank you for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time out to do this event with us.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. I love the Strand, and hopefully I can visit you guys in person again someday and yeah, check out all your cool books. But yeah, thanks for moderating and everything too, Nick. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, yeah. We'd love to have you come back in when it's safe and everything. Hopefully, we'll get to that point sooner rather than later.
Are you walk-in customers and stuff right now?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
You guys have walk-in customers and stuff right now, or is it just like curbside pick?
Yeah, so we do have some walk-in business, but we are strictly keeping track of who comes in and who comes out as far as numbers. Okay. So try to make sure it's a safe shopping environment at present. And we're just gearing up for the holidays. But yeah. For those of you watching, if you wanted to purchase any additional copies of City Monster, there is a green button in the middle of the screen at the bottom right here. You can click on that, or you can also find the link right. Crowdcast won't let me send a duplicate message, so I'm going to add a random space in there. Boom. You can find the link in the chat right there. All right.
All right, great.
Thanks so much once again. And
thank you, everyone.
Hope you all have a good night. Take care.
Take care.